everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Something Dark, the video version. Today's case is another case that I have covered in my audio only version of my podcast that I have on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and basically everywhere you can find podcasts. I'll leave it in the description below. But like I said, in the past few episodes, I'm going to go through my old cases and refilm them with the video component. I'm going to be looking down at my script that I have for my podcast to make sure I get all of the facts of the case correct. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. So let's get into today's case. At around 9:20 p.m. on a warm October night in 1989, three boys rode their bike home along a dead-end road from the Tom Thumb store in St. Joseph, Minneapolis, where they had rented the movie The Naked Gun. On a deserted stretch, they were stopped by a man with a gun, dressed in black, with his face covered. The man told the boys to lie in a nearby ditch and asked each of the boys their age. Two of the boys were told to run for the woods without looking back, but one boy was taken. For nearly 27 years, the case went unsolved. No body, no abductor. Tonight we're covering the case of Jacob Wetterling. Jacob was 11 years old at the time of his abduction. He was born on February 17th, 1978. He was a sweet little boy who was adored by his parents, Jerry and Patty. The day started out like any other. Jacob actually went fishing that morning with his dad, and after a successful fishing trip, they made their way home, just in time to catch the Vikings game. After the game ended, Jerry took Jacob and his brother Trevor outside to toss the football around and play for a while. Patty and Jerry had plans that evening to go to a dinner party, and they left the house at around 5:30 p.m. They were going to dinner at a friend's house who lived about 20 minutes away. They weren't planning on being gone for too long and expected to be home early. They decided to let the kids stay at home alone. Their oldest daughter, Amy, wasn't there that night, but Jacob's parents told him he could have friends stay over, and Jacob had his best friend Aaron stay over. Aaron made his way over to Jacob's. The boys were excited to be having a sleepover, especially because they didn't have school the next day. When Jerry and Patty got to the dinner party, they called home to check on the kids. They also gave the phone number of the house they were in, just in case the kids needed to reach them. During the dinner party, Patty and Jerry got a call from Trevor, asking whether the kids could ride their bikes down to the local video rental shop. Patty said no, it was after dark and cars wouldn't be able to see them. She told them that they needed to think of something else to do. When they hung up the phone, they revised their plan and they spoke to their father, telling him they would have flashlights and they would wear reflective vests. Their father felt it was a well thought out plan, and since there were three of them, he said it was fine. Only 45 minutes after getting off the phone with them, another call came through. It was one of their neighbors. The neighbor told them they needed to come home immediately. Something had happened to Jacob and he was missing. Jerry and Patty left immediately and raced home. The neighbor then called the police and told them that Jacob had been taken when they were on their way home from the video rental shop. So just moving back in time to go through the timeline of events. Trevor, Aaron, and Jacob set off from home on their bikes with torches and reflective vests like they had promised. They lived in a rural area without streetlights. Aaron later said when they were passing one of the fields, he heard something moving in the tall grass. He shrugged it off, thinking it was probably an animal. They made it down to the video rental shop and picked out the perfect movie for their sleepover. A few minutes later, they started their journey home. On their way back, on a particularly long, dark stretch of road, a man dressed in dark clothing and a mask jumped out of a driveway. He had a revolver, and he ordered the boys to throw their bikes into the ditch and lie face down on the ground. Terrified, the boys complied. Then the masked man asked each of the boys to give him their ages. Jacob's younger brother, Trevor, was told to run to a nearby wooded area, not to turn around or he would be shot. He next demanded the remaining boys to show him their faces. Then he told Aaron to run into the woods and not look back. He then grabbed Jacob by the elbow and began dragging him to a wooded area. Aaron ran as fast as he could to catch up with Trevor. When he reached him, they looked back and Jacob was gone. The two boys sprinted home, they called their parents, and 911 was contacted. Within 6 minutes of the 911 call, a sheriff's deputy was on the scene. He found the boys' bikes and immediately called for backup. Additionally, the FBI was alerted. When police first arrived, they didn't believe Aaron and Trevor's story. They thought the boys had been playing with a gun and that it had accidentally gone off, that they accidentally shot Jacob, and now the two boys were covering for each other by making up this elaborate story. Throughout the night, Jacob was searched for. On Monday, October 23rd, the search was expanded. FBI and other agencies joined the investigation. Investigators were inundated with tips, and they found tire and shoe tracks they thought they might be important. Officers and volunteers conducted aerial and ground searches. The Wetterlings met with their friends and made the conscious decision to seek as much publicity for the case as possible. The next day, an FBI expert in psychological profiles joined the case. They produced a suggestion that the abductor was likely a white loner with a physical deformity who had committed a similar crime in the past. Investigators said they got hundreds of calls. The following day, a prayer vigil drew 500 people to St. Joseph's Church. The sheriff and investigators were sure the abduction involved a sex offender, and they thought the abductor had likely left the area and suggested Jacob could be dead. A TV show called A Current Affair broadcast a national report on the abduction, which generated many more phone tips around the country. Minneapolis and St. Paul business leaders offered a $100,000 reward for Jacob's safe return. Deputies searched on horseback, and FBI said it had 20 agents assigned to the case. 5 days after Jacob's disappearance, the National Guard, the State Patrol, and the Department of Natural Resources searched a 700 square mile area for Jacob, and the Wetterlings appeared on CBS This Morning. On November 6, 1989, investigators released a sketch to the public of a man seen in the Tom Thumb convenience store on the night of the abduction. They described him as glaring at customers and said that he is white, in his 50s, and weighs around 200 pounds with white hair. On November 12th, the police released 2 more sketches. One of a man who was heard talking about the abduction in the Tom Thumb store 2 weeks after it took place. Another is of a man thought to have tried to abduct a boy in the Minneapolis suburb of New Brighton. They said that the 2 matched the earlier sketch of the man seen lurking in the Tom Thumb convenience store the night of Jacob's abduction. A flurry of tips followed. But on November 20th, 6 Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and 5 FBI agents were taken off the case. It was a massive search with tons of media attention, but with each passing day without any leads or evidence, the search went cold. Even though the media frenzy on the case died down, Jacob's family continued to follow leads, do public speeches, and anything they could do to get the word out to ensure Jacob would not be forgotten. In 2010, a blogger, Joy Baker, was looking for something to write about, and she came across Jacob's case. She was fascinated and consumed by the story. She ended up contacting Jacob's mom, Patty. She started to put together her own theory on what she thinks could have happened. Joy Baker had been 22 when Jacob had been abducted in 1989. She remembered the missing posters, the ongoing theories, and the pleas of Jacob's mother to bring him home haunted her. Joy discovered that 5 boys had all gone missing in the same area between the summer of 1986 and spring of 1987. One of these boys, Jared Skyrill, was abducted 9 months before Jacob in Cold Spring, which is very close to the Wetterlings' house. Jared was taken only 6 days before his 13th birthday, just 3 blocks from his house while walking home from a local cafe. Jared was approached by a man in a car. The man asked Jared for directions, and Jared, being a polite young boy, decided to help him. The man jumped out of the car, grabbed Jared, and threw him in the car. He told Jared that he had a gun and that he wasn't afraid to use it. Jared was driven 5 miles away to a remote area. Then he was sexually assaulted. The man drove Jared back into town and asked him if anyone recognized him. When Jared said no, he let him out of the vehicle and told him to run, and if he looked back, he would be shot. The description of the man that Jared gave was extremely similar to the description Trevor and Aaron gave to the police 9 months later. They all described the man to be of average height and weight with a low and raspy voice. Investigators were convinced that they were unrelated, The crimes had taken place in 2 different counties, and the department seemed unwilling to work together. Baker pursued every lead available to her and then some. She reached out to Jared, and the two began to piece the evidence together, and they found more unsolved sexual assaults involving young boys in the area. Each boy said the same thing about the man. He told them to run or I'll blow your head off, or some other reference to gun violence. Baker alerted the Stearns County Sheriff's Office, who had told them they'd never heard of these assaults, but didn't believe they were connected to Jacob. Joy and Jared spent hundreds of hours searching for other victims to get their stories. They relentlessly harassed the county sheriff's office, they involved Jacob's mother, and they did interviews with local media. They had a hard time getting law enforcement to take their research seriously. Jacob's story was featured on John Walsh's CNN TV show The Hunt. The episode included Jared's assault and compared the 2 cases. This was the final media push that was needed to get the FBI to reopen the investigation. Moving on to the arrests in the case. On October 28, 2015, some 26 years after Jacob's disappearance, a man named Danny Heinrich was named as a person of interest in the case, and he was arrested. So, who is this guy? Back in December of 1989, the year Jacob was taken, Danny had actually been questioned by the FBI. He had also been a suspect in Jared's assault, but there wasn't enough evidence to convict him. They didn't have enough evidence linked to Danny or Jacob, so he was let go. But Danny's DNA was actually connected to the abduction of Jared through DNA evidence on Jared's sweater. Unfortunately, by the time authorities matched Danny's DNA to Jared's case, the statute of limitations had expired and no charges could be brought against him. Luckily, even though the statute of limitations had expired, they now had enough cause to search Danny's house. Upon searching his house, police uncovered some pretty damning things. They found child pornography, and as a result, were able to arrest him. As a part of a strange plea bargain, Danny decided to cooperate with the authorities. Part of the agreement was to confess to murdering Jacob and revealing the location of his body. He accepted, and on September 1st, 2016, Danny showed the FBI where he had buried Jacob 27 years earlier. The plea bargain meant that Danny would only be charged for the child pornography possession. He would serve a maximum sentence of 20 years in a federal medical center in Massachusetts. This is what his chilling confession revealed about what happened that night in 1989. That night, he was driving around with no clear plan for the night. He came across the 3 boys riding their bikes. He said he parked his car, put on a mask, and waited for the boys to come closer to him. He grabbed Jacob at gunpoint and handcuffed him. Jacob cried and asked, "What did I do wrong?" Danny drove him from St. Joseph to Painesville, 30 miles away. After arriving in a remote area of Painesville, he took Jacob to a gravel pit. He took Jacob out of the car, removed his clothes, and took him to a grove of trees where he molested him. Jacob cried and said, "I'm cold, I want to go home." He told police that he was able to avoid detection by listening to a police scanner. He heard police sirens, which, although had nothing to do with him, scared him, and he panicked. He decided to shoot Jacob. He told Jacob to turn around, as he raised his revolver to the back of Jacob's head. As he pulled the trigger, the gun jammed. Danny said he pulled the trigger a second time, and Jacob fell to the ground. Danny walked home to the Plaza Apartments in Painesville, but returned a couple of hours later to bury Jacob in a shallow grave. 1 year later, Danny returned and discovered that the remains had been partially uncovered. He could even see Jacob's jacket. He moved the bones and clothes to a farm across the highway where he dug a trench 2 feet deep. That's where Jacob remained for nearly 27 years. There's been a small silver lining that has come from this case. In 1994, the Jacob Wetterling Act was passed. This was the first law to institute a sex offender registry, and after Jacob's abduction, Patty and Jerry formed the Jacob Wetterling Foundation, which is an advocacy group for children's safety. The foundation is dedicated to spreading awareness and education about sexual predators, how it happens, and what we can do to prevent it. That brings us to the end of today's case. Personally, I find this case really, really heartbreaking, the whole story of how everything unfolded with Jacob. There is the transcript of what Danny confessed to. You can see the kind of whole script and everything that happened. I left a good bit of it out because it is extremely disturbing, but that's online if you'd like to learn more about the case. I want to say thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave your opinions on the case in the comments below and we can have a discussion. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you can be notified whenever I post, and I will see you in my next video.